None of us.
Maybe it's good the weather's not great because I don't think we even have enough chairs for 40, 50 people.
You're being funny.
It's a waka waka.
It's called the Emerald Cities Collaborative.
I think mine is yours is junior.
So we'll get started in a few minutes. Feel free to introduce yourselves to your neighbors and get to know each other while we're waiting.
Oh, there was some kind of insane connected Wi-Fi password saying that you have Wi-Fi password.
Oh, I can remember it. 1001.
1001.
Wi-Fi 1001. All lowercase.
One.
And,
Yep. Drum roll.
what else?
Da, da, da.
Is that keyboard pretty well?
Yes, it's actually my second one because I dropped this a couple of times and the keyboard took a hit and helped to save the iPad, right? So, and yeah, bent it enough to knock off all these keys, so I got another one. But no, it's $100 and it honestly makes this not infinitely, but a significantly more. I carry this to conferences and take all my notes.
Can you run a presentation?
I've never done it. Yeah, I usually just bring it home. The only, of course, it's an iPad. The only downside is it's not play well with
I worked
normal
for them
devices.
initially 4 days
No
a week from
USB, no
mid-October to
nothing.
mid-January.
Okay.
And
You can get a plug.
Oh, that goes into the.
Yeah. Oh, this is a. Have you done this?
Live
stream to YouTube.
No, I never have.
YouTube.
Oh no, I've never done it. Any online instructions?
Great experience. The person to whom I reported the first time around, actually from like week 2 offered me a
Email,
because I wasn't for this job. I just got so called me
Not that
back
important. Nobody sent me anything good.
for another month.
Yeah, I put out a new version of my ebook last
I
week.
did all
And
sorts
so
of
I've been
materials. I wrote the Capitol Wheel website. I
obsessively
wrote
getting the
National
Amazon
Harbor's summer
stats
events
refresh
brochure.
So on an ebook, do you publish it GA?
Yeah, so what I did was,
One chair.
and I experimented with this earlier in previous versions, but this is the first time I was really serious
No,
about
this
it.
side.
I put an Amazon version up through Kindle's
Just so we
self-publishing.
have empty chairs
And
towards the
you
end.
get, I'm charging enough that I get 70% of it.
It's discreetly kind of
Exactly.
Okay, selling it for $8, so I get $5.50 a pop, basically.
Enjoy it while you
And then I also have it on my own site as PDF. But I did I didn't want to just sell it. I still wanted to make it available. So I have it like a Radiohead, pay what you want. And at first, a pretty high percentage were donating.
Right.
Lately, it's
like
dropped.
that
I think
number
it's
two.
not my friends anymore.
the
It's dropped.
yeah.
And I'm going to try to pitch it out to
Earlier.
probably science professors, so I'll have a bunch of free downloads for students.
Okay, just tweet the link.
But
Great.
nobody's getting rich here. But so $3 or $4 a month.
I'm sorry, what did you say the password was again?
1001.
But more than that, it's
Wi-Fi
just
1001. Wi-Fi is all lowercase.
Doing some interesting projects.
Yeah, I've been a couple of different things. Yeah, I'm doing a big
We're
list script.
broadcasting.
What?
1001 Wi-Fi.
I'm doing a bunch of
1001.
list script work.
Okay.
And they're Beverly.
So we're just getting settled in here. We're going to start
Yes, feel free
momentarily.
to grab something. And the hashtag is net and then the number 2 DC. So we are going to be live streaming it. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for braving the weather and making it here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do brief introductions. We'll go around and you all can, if you can say your name, organization, or company, and then also if you have a burning question that you would like the presenters to talk about, feel free to add that. And then we'll hand it over to the panelists. They're going to go at probably about 5 to 10 minutes each for presentations, and then we'll do a Q&A with the panelists. So why don't we start with Violet? And if you want to tell folks about Turner Strategies, they're hosting the event, or turner4D, as you all are now known. Thank you all so much for hosting, and if you want to just share a little bit about your organization.
Yes, so I'm Violet from turner4D. I'm the director of the Washington Mill Face, and we're hosting today's event. Thank you for sharing, for letting us lead. And we're public policy communication firm, and have next to me Roman Forrest Gallman, and Alan Rosenblatt is also a partner, so pretty much the whole team's here. And we work on progressive issues. We do both digital and traditional media. And it's having me here. And I'll be doing the presentations, and I'll be live tweeting from turner4D, 92, and my personal account.
Excellent.
All at the same time.
All the same.
All at the same time.
Amazing.
Now the same time I'll be clicking to the presentation.
Make us sound smart.
Would you all like to add anything else about turner4D? Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So why don't we just continue with the introductions? We can just go around. Yes, sure.
Sid Bowman, I'm the managing partner for 4D. I want to thank all of you all.
Right.
My name is Mindy. I do a lot of freelance web analytics, all that wonderful, geeky stuff. I was working with a group called MODEV, focuses mobile development, and they're having a conference coming up on UX. So basically anything that you're doing, how to make it look cooler, wireframes, how to make it more intuitive. So I just want to pass out a couple flyers. I have a 20% off discount. We all want to save money.
When is it?
It's May, let me see, 19th to 20th, and it's going to be held in McLean. They should get that metro up and running, you know, Thanksgiving, I believe.
2030.
So it's really convenient. Yeah, it's 2 days. It's a full day of workshops, really cool workshops, and a full day of keynote speakers. A lot of good networking because we're DC and we love networking. So that's my really fast intro.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Lauren. I mediate for the DC Superior Court, but I have a colleague who is launching a new business to sell conflict management conflict management systems, and she wants a good website and web presence, and so it's kind of a night job.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
My name is Setra. I'm running an online portal for college admissions in Indonesia called Sarjana, and so here to learn about, boosting our online presence, definitely, there with the youth that we work with.
I'm Paula Whitaker. I'm a writer editor.
I'm Ronnie Keller. I'm about to start a new job as communications director at the Emerald Cities Collaborative, where one of my responsibilities will be more web oversight than I've ever done before. I've written content, but I haven't been the person really responsible for a website. I was director of media relations at the Alliance to Save Energy for quite a few years before that. So this came up right on time, and it seemed like a great opportunity. And thanks for doing it.
I'm Chris Lundberg. I've been at the intersection of technology and nonprofits for about 12 years now. I co-founded a group called Democracy in Action and Salsa Labs, and now onto a third called Fracture, which we'll hear about a little bit later.
Colin Delaney. I've been in the online communications, online politics world for about 17 years. As a consultant, I work with nonprofits on digital strategy, list building, fundraising, a lot of advocacy work. I also run the website epolitics.com and write for Campaigns and Elections magazine.
Hi, I'm Chris Wolz, CEO at Forum One Communications. My career has been in international development and environmental policy, and then now for 17 years also in digital consulting. Forum One is a digital agency with a focus on helping organizations be more successful on issues around health, education, environment, human rights, and other things. We're based here just outside DC and have staff in Seattle and California. And
soon an office in DC.
Yeah, we have a small office at a co-working space here in DC. It'd be a nice place for one of these meetings.
Yes.
And shameless plug, we're recruiting, so if you know of anybody.
Did you say Forum One?
Forum One.
Yeah, the Alliance Houston.
Correct. Yeah. And nice to see you, Paula, one of our writers. Yeah.
I'm Alan Rosenblatt. I'm also a partner at turner4D here in this building. And just to escalate things, I've been doing internet politics for 21 years and the intersection of political science and the internet for 25 years. So been doing and thinking along these lines for another 10 years on top of that. So it's been a long time, and I have a lot of fun doing it. It's quite a passion, and people don't think I'm crazy anymore. They used to think I was crazy, right? Because it was a fad. All right. Well, okay. In addition to working at turner4D, I'm the host of the Internet Advocacy Roundtable, which is a similar forum to this, and we'll be having an event on Thursday on riding the wave about basically how social media has changed the publication and distribution processes in the news, and even how advocacy and public affairs organizations are becoming more like newsrooms as a result of that. And that's going to be over a luncheon, and if you want more information about that, I can give it to you afterwards. I also write a weekly column at socialmediatoday.com called Social Advocacy and Politics, which comes out every Tuesday, so my column came out this morning. And as of, I guess, now, Colin and I will both be contributing to connectivity.com, which is the new blog from CQ Roll Call, which will be focusing on best practices in online advocacy. And we're very, I know I'm very excited about it. And Colin just looks at it as more work to do.
That would be correct.
So welcome everybody, and look forward to your questions and comments.
And I'm Roshni Kotari. I'm the organizer for NetsquaredDC. How many of you all have been to NetSquared before, or first timers to NetSquared?
Which one? Yeah, you gotta pick one.
First timers to NetSquared. Okay, we have a few folks. And then we have a lot of old timers in NetSquared.
So if you add us up, we're talking 70 years in the field experience. Well, 65.
Yeah.
That's
I feel 65.
Frightening.
So NetSquared is a community. It was started through TechSoup Global. You all may have heard of TechSoup. They provide online donations and software donations to nonprofits. And NetSquared is kind of the intersection between social good and technology. So we're hosting NetSquared at different organizations this year. If you have ideas for topics and events, feel free to talk to me afterwards.
My name is Eduardo Ulloa, and I work for a company called Envision Consulting out of Alexandria, where primarily manage technology for small businesses and nonprofits and associations locally. And I myself actually manage all the online communications, and I was hired to actually develop the marketing practice in the company. So this comes right in perfectly for me, and I'm really happy to be here.
I am Annie Singer. I am Campaigns Communications Manager at a group called Compassion and Choices, which is 3 floors up. And we do a lot of our advocacy and meeting with our audiences in social media rather than at our website. And I'm kind of hoping this event is going to help me understand if that's sustainable and smart, and sort of how you think it all up in communications.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mari Carmen Smith-Martinez. I work for Vixel Solutions. Some of you may know Carla Briseño, and she's on her way, actually. So she apologizes for she's held up a little bit in Fairfax. But Vixel is communications and technology. We do a lot of web development, recently transitioning into e-learning. And I'm new to the area. I arrived in DC late last year to join Vixel for a contract that we are working on with HUD to develop an online training course for housing counselors as part of the Dodd-Frank mandate. So that's what we're working on right now. And I am here tonight. I'm just sort of exploring things that are available in DC and trying to get in touch with the communities. And thanks for having me, Brett.
I'm Joe Miles. I'm at Food and Water Watch as a digital program director. We're a consumer advocacy group, and 2 of my big upcoming projects that I'm about to start working on are formalizing our organization's digital strategy and also starting everything under our website. So this is very directly relevant to me. My name is Diana Douglas. I'm in online communications at a small nonprofit called Jewish Women International. We focus a lot on domestic violence prevention and financial literacy for women. And yeah, we're undergoing a website redesign now, so hopefully we get a lot out
there. Hi, my name is Andrew, and I'm a self-taught web developer, and I'm here just to learn what I can learn. And thanks for having me.
Okay.
My name is Benjamin Juan. I run a website called Brew, which is, I always tell people it's like an online Shark Tank for product feedback. So think of it as a community of product managers, designers, coders who actually provide what I call peer-level expert-type feedback for websites and mobile apps instead of just regular user feedback. So the idea here is to help accelerate product refinements, try to avoid any glaring holes or weaknesses in your product before you do your big marketing push for marketing launch.
How do you spell it again?
It's called Brew, B-R-E-U-E. Couldn't afford B-R-E-W correctly, but we got the domain, and that's all that counts.
All right. Well, I guess I'm going to set up the kind of the topic, and we'll dive deeper into this. You know, the way I see it, this kind of conversation, the idea for the panel, popped out of a discussion that was happening on PCDC? Was it on?
I don't know on that list.
Yeah, on whether, or was it on Progressive Exchange?
No, it was on PCDC.
PCDC, about whether or not websites were dead. And, you know, there's this whole question of, people advising, oh, you don't need a website anymore, you just need Facebook. And, and of course, everybody who knows the business says, well, that's not true because then Facebook owns all your content, and that's not really a good thing to do. And so the conversation emerged, and I know Colin weighed in very heavily in the conversation.
I'm not on PC. Yahoo won't allow. I'm not able to email the PCDC. I'm very angry about it. I don't want to know today. It's not that bad.
Okay, so
it's Yahoo's fault.
So within that context, I know I weighed in on the conversation. It was really I really wanted to drive home the point that it's not that websites are dead. It's that websites' roles are evolving, and the way I look at it, and I've looked at it. I think I've looked at this whole process this way for quite some time, and that is that there's it used to be that the website was your end-all, be-all. That's where you wanted everything to happen. You were driving people to your website, and you were putting all your content on your website, and you were getting people to sign up to be members of your website, and it was all focused on the website, and that was the way everything worked. And then this thing comes around called social media, and all of a sudden you start finding out that you set up a Twitter account, a Facebook account, and the next thing you know, you've got a few thousand Twitter followers, you've got a few thousand Facebook fans. It may start growing bigger than that, and then you start comparing it to your web traffic, and lo and behold, your social media your social media channels become more interface with more people than your website does. And so the question is, well, does that mean we don't need the website anymore? And I really don't think so. Again, I mentioned that if you put stuff on social media, there's ownership issues. The content is now partly owned, licensed to YouTube or to Facebook in particular, and they can repurpose it, and or they can just shut it down if they decide to. If you violate terms of use, all of a sudden you may find yourself no longer having access to your own account. These are very high-risk situations, and so. While on the one hand, I think it's essential that you're there on social media and have that channel operating to get your message out in a very vibrant form, you still need your website to be the hub. You need the website to be the place where you have the content that you own and it stays there and you control it. But at the same time, you don't want the website to be someplace that people have to come to see your content, and you certainly don't want your website to be something where once they come to your website, they can't get out. Right? You want people to be able to move back and forth between your website and all the social media channels and the email that you send out fluidly. And the way I like to look at it is Social media may become your new front office, but the back office is your website. And no matter what point of access, whether they come in through Twitter, through Facebook, through your website, through your email, whatever, LinkedIn, whatever it is, wherever they come in to your space, your web presence, they should easily be able to move to any other part of your web presence. And so rather than thinking in terms of your website strategy, you should be thinking in terms of your web presence strategy. The way this manifests itself on the website is a combination of share buttons, which I think you've all seen. And this is where on any piece of content or any web page on your site, people can share to their Twitter channel, or to their Facebook channel, or to their LinkedIn, or to their Google+. Which means that you may not be on all these channels, but your readers, your web visitors, may be on channels that you're not. And you want to make sure that they can easily click and share to the channels where they are, even if you're not there. Also, you want to make sure that people can easily find your social media channels and subscribe to them off of your website, as well as being able to subscribe to your email off of your website as well. So always make that in the template so you can always access and connect that way. And then on what you're putting out on social media, a lot of it's going to link back to your website so that people can come back to you. And you also have to remember that most people won't click and come back to your website. So you have to figure out ways to make sure that the message that goes with your link is good enough to get that message that you want them to know, even if they don't click back. And I think that's the big picture. It's kind of a big web presence that's completely woven together. And I'll leave it at that big picture. I'll come back to specifics during the question and answer, but I think you're going to find a lot more in the weed stuff coming from our other speakers.
Yeah, very cool. Well, so again, I'm Colin Delaney, ePolitics.com, and I would definitely agree with Alan about the hub metaphor. I think is very good. But a shameless plug for my latest ebook, How to Use the Internet to Win in 2014. I use that same example, that the website is the hub, and then alongside that you need two basic other channels, right? You need some way to stay in touch with people, email, social media, text messages, whatever it is. And you need another, basically an outreach effort to spread your messaging and to engage people. But the website, all of your far-flung pieces of content need to refer back to the website, right? You don't ever want someone to run into you anywhere and not have a way to get back to your central point. So, that being said, I kind of want to step back and act like the history major I once was and kind of take a long view of websites and where we've been and sort of some ideas of where we're going. Because if we're designing a site now, we're likely designing something that we may well be using in 5 years, right? Just because these things tend to be hard, as anyone who's ever done a website migration knows, it's a real pain, and you tend to be stuck with what you've got for a long time. So imagine your your year 2005 website with no social integration, suddenly transported to 2010, and you're suddenly way behind date. So I'm going to take the long arc. So I built my first web page in the summer of 1996, and like just about everything then, it was a static page. And what does that mean? Every piece of every web page was unique and individual, right? Every page, it was like files in your file folder. If I wanted to put in a new header image, I had to change every single page individually, right? And you were very much limited. It was text and images. And even then, you had to be careful with the images because a 200K image might take 3 minutes to come down over a modem, right? So text is what did the selling. Now, over the next few years, say, around 99, 2000, you start to see things like, well, you'd seen a little earlier, but things like Cold Fusion, the rise of cascading style sheets, the first sort of attempts to separate the website content from the pages it lived on. And this is sort of the long arc that we're seeing, is the separation of the content from its presentation, right? So CSS, how many of y'all have worked with CSS style sheets? How many of y'all have no earthly idea what I'm talking about? Just a couple, not bad. So style sheets are basically the things that on the website you're saying every header that looks like this is going to, every header of this level is going to look like this and behave like this. Every paragraph is going to be of this font and this size, that kind of thing. So rather than having to put in an individual font declaration at the beginning of every paragraph, you can do that globally. So again, you're separating out the actual structure of the document from its presentation. Then over the next few years, again, we start to come up with, I would say that the next iteration was sort of the interactive features, forms, JavaScript. Doing a button rollover was a big deal when the button would change when you put your mouse on it. And then sort of now we're suddenly getting into the mid-2000s, and you start to see things to get much more sophisticated. APIs, which allow a website to draw data from another source. For instance, how many of y'all have ever used, had an email sign-up form on your website, right? That probably interacted with an API, via an API with a database, you know, in the company. Like Chris founded a company that did that sort of thing, you know, and you would all interact with the Salsa API. But right around the same time, things started to get really kind of exciting. Content management systems started to get sophisticated, right? Things like Drupal and WordPress began to give people a lot of potential. But now your data, and again, your website is getting abstracted more and more from the idea of pages. It's becoming entries in a database where one part of your if I view a web page, part of it may be coming from here, part of it's coming from here, part of it's coming from here, and it's assembled. So again, we're getting further and further from the idea of a page. And then social integration starts to come in. So people aren't just interacting with your pages on your website anymore. They're pushing a button to tell the world about it. Or they're, as Alan was talking about, seeing you on social media and sharing, but maybe not even looking at it. If I tweet something, it's very common, and this is for clients or my own stuff, it is very common for the tweet to get more spread, get more retweets or whatever, then we get clicks back to the actual article. And the same thing with Facebook. So people are interacting with your content all out there. And I would say the next sort of step is, how many of y'all have heard of responsive design? It's one of these phrases that floats around. Basically, it's design that adapts to the condition that it's in. The most straightforward version you'll see is the more recent redesign of Slate.com is a good example. If you move the screen when you're looking at Slate.com, the pieces go boink, 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 and move around to match that screen. You know, you can get a lot of, if you go to the Washington Post, for instance, on my cell phone, I don't get served the main Post website, which actually drives me crazy. What I get is a crappy mobile version. Thanks, Post. But that's an example of a responsive design, that they're detecting what device I'm on, and they're giving me that information. So these are this sort of basic trend, I think, is toward a website as a fluid concept, right? We tend still to think of it as a series of pages, but it's really becoming more and more a series of pieces of content that are getting displayed in different ways depending on who is asking for them and what device they're using to ask for them. So, but that being said, we still have this idea of a central repository of content, right? And I don't think the idea of the website is going away any more than I think social media destroys email, right? We still have a need for a neutral communications medium that, as Alan says, we control. But in this whole process, several things I don't think have changed, right? First off, content does not go out of style, right? Everything comes down to words, pictures, video, whatever it is, that if you are making your case effectively, you're making your case effectively. And the website itself is merely the means to present that. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on, I've probably built over the years, I don't really build websites anymore, but I've built probably 200 over the years. People spent so much time on the design and so little time thinking about the words that would need to fill it. Second thing is optimization. We tend to think of it in terms of social media content or emails now, but optimization also applies to websites. Again, starting with one thing and then trying to test it and make it better and make it better and make it better. The website as a hub for recruitment doesn't change. Where do people join your email list? On the website, typically. And often, say they come in from a Google ad, you may get them on your Facebook page after that, but the website had to do that conversion job. Another thing that doesn't go out of style, but maybe it should, is this idea of individualization. Especially in the early days of the web, there was this idea that, oh, well, Optimize will have 4 different websites depending on what audience we're trying to reach, sometimes that works. Amazon's recommended books works very, very well. Sometimes, the individualization, you can put an enormous amount of work into something that doesn't pay off. But the whole responsive design arc is pushing us toward an individualization of display, right? Rather than having different content for different audiences, you're displaying it based on how someone is asking. And that is also moving us toward this idea of portability, that the website isn't just a thing, right? The website kind of goes places. You know, you're pushing pieces of your website as content out to Facebook or to Twitter. And then as you know, more and more people are interacting with us on mobile devices, the website has to be portable enough to actually work on that mobile site. Has anyone here ever signed up for an email list from a mobile website? One? Maybe two. It's not easy, right? It's kind of awkward, and that's a challenge for all of us. So future challenges, I think, that is a good example. The need to provide easy ways for people to take action on mobile devices. The sheer variety of platforms that we're going to have to be prepared for. Again, this argues for thinking of a website as pieces of content rather than pages, discrete pages. The continuing separation of content and presentation. And then finally, the biggest challenge for anyone communicating anything, anywhere, is sheer clutter. That as I walk down the street, I'm bombarded by hundreds of advertising messages. And so the content that we put online has got to cut through that clutter to reach people's hearts or minds or both. The final trend is, and it fits into this last one, is cat pictures. They will never go away because they touch the heart. So thank you very much.
Chris?
Should I go next? Yeah. Great. Thanks for the chance to talk. I was going to show two examples of different aspects of website as a hub, integrated strategy, multi-channel. And do you mind if I might take the control of your cursor?
Oh yeah, whatever you prefer. I can do it for you. What do you prefer?
You could just say.
I'll come down here that I can see what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks again to NetSquared and Turner for the opportunity. I want to show two examples. First one, just a few quick things that impressed me. Save the Children has been doing some really interesting things with its campaign to raise awareness, raise funds, and encourage people to take action around the issue of children refugees streaming out of Syria. It's a stark issue, and their director of communications, director of digital marketing, is really trying to take a very bold position on it. And I give a lot of some of the things I'm showing here I've stolen from a blog post by Camp. His objective was awareness, advocacy, and fundraising, really the way to raise public awareness about the issue to help push the political process so that to help ensure that humanitarian groups can get access to areas in Syria. Advocacy for political solutions as well, and then also fundraising. Here's a list of things they've done. Actually, I'll make this presentation available. I'm not going to show you all of them. But if you want to talk about the website as a hub, the website is sort of the nerve center. Here's about a dozen things that they've been doing across a whole bunch of different platforms that all integrate in some way with the core website that they built. A great website. They launched this in September with the New York Times ad, banner ads, infographics. They had a song and donation as a fundraiser on YouTube from Ellie Goulding. More on Reddit, blogging, tweeting, petition, a lot of social media specific content, and also use of Thunderclap to raise attention to the issue through social media channels. So some neat stuff. This is the core website that shows a lot of this content, video, infographics, and other things. Kind of an edgy approach to. They're not trying to be. They're trying to grab you emotionally with the issue. This is actually interesting. They didn't post this that much on Pinterest. Other people did. Their CEO is blogging about the issue, which I think is a great lesson for a lot of organizations. Get your senior people involved. Outcomes. I'll mention they just a month ago they were on the Today Show, which I think takes some doing to get that kind of TV coverage at national level. social media. They're sharing what I really like here on Facebook. They're doing, they've got a wraparound on these photos that's branded. You can see in the lower left corner of the picture there. This is content specific for this channel for Facebook, and it works well. And you can see they're getting thousands of people to like or to comment on the pictures. They got, this is the, I think this is Thunderclap. They had 672 people sign up for this. Is basically allowing them to channel messages to your social media accounts. So this is really building a group of people to be your network. Some very compelling things on YouTube. They're getting thousands of views. They've raised for this specific campaign about 80,000 towards a target of 100,000. I don't know if they're happy with it. I haven't had the chance to speak to the communications director to ask if this is a success, but it's obviously ongoing. The issue hasn't been solved. So interesting campaign. They're doing a lot of things. They're doing about you open up a product. Sorry.
Okay. Here's your browser. Get it flooded from
This
Greece.
is some
So
some
cute.
stock photography of
Making the children? What is
We'll
it?
have a chance to
so what I think Save the Children is doing is a nice example of what Alan mentioned. Of again, the website is a hub for a lot of different things on a lot of different platforms. People are not all going to be interacting with you on your domain. They might be interacting with you through this other channel. If you tie them all together, the website is sort of a hub or the nerve center for all of that. And I think they're doing that well. And I assume on the back end, their time with CRM system, their time subscriptions and social and let me show you one of, and we didn't have anything to do with that Save the Children campaign, but I think it's a great example. I'll show you a project that we've been involved with, so we know a little bit of the story here. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is a foundation that funds a lot of work in trying to improve U.S. health, the health of the U.S. population. They use the phrase trying to build a culture of health. And we've been fortunate to work with them over several years on something they've done. They decided that one of the ways we can draw attention to the issue of health across the country is to collect the data and show how healthy is the country. You know, where do we have good healthy behavior and where don't we? And to do it at a national level, they work with the University of Wisconsin and pull together county health data across every state. And they brought us in a few years ago to basically decide, well, how do we put this online? We've got large amounts of data. We could have put lots and lots of tables up, spreadsheets, PDF files, but we thought, well, this has got to be engaging. This has got to get people interested. And what they ultimately want is that this data, county by county health across the country, inspires people to take action. Whether it's people who are county health officials, whether it's business people, whether it's people with the school districts, whether it's other civic or religious leaders, but they want to inspire action. So they start with the data. And what's compelling about it is, here's Virginia. Oh, I lost it. A lot of demos. It lets you see on the left side is health, on the right side is health factors. You could think of this as behavior. Where are the healthiest behaviors? Smoking, obesity, teen pregnancy, drinking, visits to the dentist, any number of factors. Where do you have the least healthy behaviors and where do you have the most healthy behaviors? And then what are the health outcomes? And you can see within the state of Virginia, you can see a ranking of counties from most healthy to least healthy. Sorry, this isn't the biggest in the world. Halifax County isn't doing too well. Adult smoking rate of 21% versus national level of 14 14%, Virginia average of 18%. So what this inspires is, and what's beautiful about this is everybody wants to compare themselves to right? First thing, if you live in Fairfax, you want to look at Loudoun County. If you live in, Montgomery County, you want to see, whatever your neighboring counties are on the other side. And this allows you to do kind of a county comparison. I won't show it to you. But this also inspires a lot of press attention. So this came out about a month ago, the 5th annual edition of this. And they got about 600 pickups in broadcast media, radio, and TV that they figure reached 26 million people. They also got picked up in print or online news coverage about 3,100 times to date. It's increasing every day. So about 3,100 mentions in the press. And it's the small town papers, the statewide papers in every state of the country saying Turner County's up, Turner County's down, Madison County's up, Madison County's down, and quoting the county health commissioner saying, wow, we've got to really redouble our efforts this year, which is what they really want to accomplish. And then what the whole purpose of it is to inspire them to take action. So over years, they built up this website. Again, what they've got is not a bunch of content, PDFs, spreadsheets. It's interactive data that people can use. And then they try to guide people to take some action, figure out what's going to work what's going to work best for their county, see some showcases, see some actions that others have taken, a variety of tools and resources. They're really trying to use this content to get people inspired to take action. And they have the whole range of social media, rebroadcasting, tweeting, Facebook channel as well. They have webinars. So it's a multimedia campaign, and again, it all ties together in the website. So that's two interesting examples of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very cool. Okay, so slide over a little bit.
Yeah, I'll So as we're bringing up the slides, so I'm going to cover some of the problems that we see that have really cropped up over the past few years, and then what we're doing at Fracture to try and help solve some of those problems. So I'm going to go through about a dozen slides to kind of describe some of that. Basically, so I mentioned earlier on, we've been in the nonprofit technology industry for about a dozen years, right? So first, it was hard to do advocacy, and we spun up Democracy in Action to help get advocacy out there, help online advocacy become the omnipresent force that it is now, where everyone's got petitions and advocacy tools. A lot of people don't remember 10 or 12 years ago, you didn't. There was very little of this online stuff. So that was a problem we saw then. About 5 years ago, or 6 years ago now, we realized that tying some of the information together, getting your CRM and your website connected together was a challenge. And so we started Salsa Labs to help solve that problem. But now we start seeing a bunch of different problems. Slide. So as Alan's been talking about, as we've all been mentioning, the number of ways we have to communicate has just really exploded, right? So that we've had to deal now with all these social networks. You still have your website, you still have your email, you still have all your traditional media, your direct mail, your PR stuff, everything else like that. All this other crap that we have to deal with now is just exploding. And not everyone's in the same spot. It used to be that they were all on your email list, or maybe they all came to your website, but now a third of them are on social media, a third of them are offline completely, a third of them are somewhere else, right? This massive increase in channels causes huge issues, both with getting the message out the door and also getting the data back from all this stuff, right? So now you've got like 15 different statistics on everything that you need to know. You've got your likes, your shares, your comments. You've also got your opens, your clicks. You've got your, your traffic through the site. You still have your all direct mail stats. You've got your PR stats. It's explosive, the number of things that we have to deal with now, and it's extremely hard. This is a new problem, and it's getting worse, right? It's not getting any better. It's getting worse. Every 6 months, something new comes across. Vine, dear God, should we use Vine? I have no idea. How do we do stats on it? How do we pay money? Do we use money? God knows. In another few months, something else is going to crop up, right? So this is a massive and increasing problem that's happening, this explosion of channels. Next slide. The next one is that getting good data analysts is hard. They're expensive. They cost a lot of money. If you find them, they stick around for 6 months and hop to a better job. Or, finding good people to crunch all these numbers becomes harder and harder and harder and harder. Maybe you've got some on staff, even if you don't have folks on staff, finding even consultants to do that work becomes harder and harder. So if you're asking a basic question, you got $50,000 to invest and grow on your list, where do I spend it? That becomes an impossible question to answer now because we can't figure out what the right allocation of data is based on all this information that's coming in. And the last one we saw is a big problem now is once you've got data, assuming you somehow managed to cobble it together, what the hell do you do with it, right? Like you're like, okay, God, I got all this data. It's awesome. It tells me that my website is doing better than this. But I don't have the time to sink in to push that messaging back out the door, right? So these are problems that we saw as new, problems that weren't happening before, and that are only getting worse and worse and worse. So so the first thing we did is we assumed that this was going to be a data problem. Right? We needed an analytics solution. We had to have some technology that people could just throw their data at, and it would just give them numbers, and it would work. Right? So we built out this database analytics engine. We took it to a bunch of groups, and they're like, "This is great. This is exactly the analytics stuff we need." And we said, "Great, let's get going." So we said, "Okay, let's get your data." And they're like, "Okay, no problem. It's end of quarter, so it'll be a couple weeks." 2 weeks turns into 4 weeks. 4 weeks turns into 8 weeks. 8 weeks turns into 12 weeks, right? The problem wasn't that people didn't want the statistics and understand it was important, right? The problem was that they didn't have the time. They basically didn't have either the time or the channel expertise to do all this stuff, right? So this is something where we realized that we didn't need another analytics solution. Right? We had to figure out how to give people time. That's a hard thing to do, right? Like, how do you give people time? In some cases, how do you give people channel expertise too, right? So, like, how do you tell them or teach people how to use Facebook statistics or Facebook analytics or Google stuff or all these different tools? So we saw that was one of the biggest problems. So our solution that we're working with a bunch of groups on now is we have created a digital army of bots, of scripts and programs that you basically interact with, next slide, that act as an extension to you. So that whereas before, if you had to be the one to log into your email program, your CRM, your website analytics, your Facebook, your Twitter, your 15 different logins at least to do all that stuff. Now you could have a bunch of bots that could do all that crap work for you. So you basically go out there and give commands to bots. So like treat them like an intern, like a Supreme Court intern or something, right? They just give you orders, and the bots go off and do it, or the bots go off and go tackle some of these hairy tasks. So I'm not going to go into too many of the details, but basically some of the things that some of the groups are working with, like the Audubon Society and Drug Policy Alliance and Center for Reproductive Rights and a few other organizations, are using these bots to do business intelligence work so they can see stats from all these different channels and hopefully solve some of the challenges that Alan and others have been mentioning about all this massive numbers of data coming out. Also helping groups with curation and production work and all different types of things that these bots have doing it. So that's kind of our angle on it. We've got a bunch of different bots, and I'm not going to go through some of the details on this stuff. But this is only one possible solution. I think I want to just close out and wrap up with note that we have to figure out how to deal with all these different channels somehow. Right? You can't ignore them. You can't push them off to the side. You've got to figure out a solution somewhere in your organization to dealing with all this data coming in, all these channels out there, and then knowing that you can't really ignore it. And so that's kind of our potential solution to this area. And I'm not going to go through all these. That's about it. So yeah.
Can you get into at least one case of defining exactly what the bot does and how it works, technically speaking?
Sure. So I'll use an email report as an example. Right. So one of the things in most CRMs, if you've got a mid to large size organization, collating your email statistics across the last 3 years of your organization's history is a pain in the butt. Someone's got to go in and go to each single report for an email. God forbid you're doing A/B testing or anything moderately advanced. Some person has to go in, cut and paste the data, open rate statistics, everything else like that from whatever CRM or email program you're using, put it into a spreadsheet, format that spreadsheet, keep it up to date every time new emails go out, so that when your weekly report comes, you can see how an email's doing, right? Turns out that takes a lot of work, right? You'd think it wouldn't, but like just Convio, for example, each one of those reports, each number takes about 20 minutes just to get one number, right? That's where you log in, you click through the 15 different things, you schedule a report, you wait for the report to finish, you realize you got it wrong, you reschedule the report, you wait for it to report again, and then you get one number. Multiply that by 1,000, and suddenly you're ticking up someone's whole day. There are organizations who have staff people dedicated to doing nothing but pulling Convio statistics for their email.
And
right?
It's repetitive.
And it's repetitive. It's the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So take that thing and realize with bots, you can just schedule the bots to do it. Yep, pull these numbers for me every 6 hours. So I always have an up-to-date spreadsheet that has every email statistic that you would ever want. It's updated every 6 hours across an organization of 10 or 4,000. So when working with a couple organizations, they've got thousands of people and sending out literally hundreds and hundreds of emails. With bots, you can now do that as opposed to guessing. So that's a specific example.
Okay, but are bots, so sorry,
That's
I'm
right.
kind of a technology geek. But are bots customized, programmed scripts?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're programs and scripts. So basically, we call them bots, but it's a script that's executed on a particular time frame that just does the same thing over and over and over again.
And are your clients able to customize their own bots, or due to the bot customization?
We have like about 30 or 40 bots now. Most of the major CRMs, et cetera. It turns out we're all using all the same stuff, right? Like the number of actual systems we're using isn't that many. We're all on Facebook. We're all on Twitter. Maybe we're using MailChimp, but we're probably using like a Salsa or Convio, or maybe a still Get Active or whatever have you. So we have bots built for most of the major systems that people are using. Others we're rolling out basically every week. So, some of the bots are actually built by the groups themselves. So we will work with them if they have a custom database. So let's say they have a local offline database where the information is not readily online accessible, right? So they'll actually build a bot that gives us every morning dumps of data. So these are direct mail databases. These are things like Razor's Edge. These are other types of offline databases. So that kind of bot mentality, though, gets you thinking, maybe I don't have to do all the work myself every single time. Maybe a human doesn't have to do this all the time. Right, so that's kind of our take on solving these particular problems. That was a BI example, but there's examples across lots of other areas about it.
With the bot, because it's a repeated script, you don't have to worry about an intern making a mistake on the third and seventh time.
Exactly. So things like quality goes up, right? So you can do things much more frequently. So, so there's a lot of advantages. The disadvantage is you can't ask them to do anything creative, right? You can't say, go figure something out, right? They're not going to be able to figure it out. You've got to tell it what you actually want it to do. So, so that's just an example of what we think is kind of a next big thing on with Fracture. So I'll hand it back to Roshni to close
Thank
out.
you so much.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, let's go ahead and have the panel up here in the front. So Chris, if you want to join them here as well. Yeah, just slide over. So what we're going to do now is do a Q&A. We'll alternate between questions that you all have as an audience, and then also if there's questions from the panel. To start the discussion, the question I have for you all, I think you all raised it in your presentations, is, and Colin, I think you especially mentioned it, if people are getting ready to do a website redesign right now, how can they prepare so their website is not outdated in a year or two? Is there a way? I think Forum 1 did a presentation on future-proofing your website. So if you all could just talk a little bit about any tips or ideas that you want to share about future-proofing your website, so what you're working on right now is still relevant in 5 years. So who would
Do you want to start first, or I'll go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Great, yeah. Sucker, I'll walk straight into that one. The more you separate the content from the presentation, the safer you're going to be. Fortunately, modern content management systems sort of have that mindset built into them if you're using Drupal or something like that. But we still tend to want to say, I want a little bar over here, and I want a little thingy over here. You know, I earned a living as a graphic designer for a few years, and it's still very easy to think that way. But the more we think in terms of how are we making our case, what words and pictures and video and whatever are we using to persuade people to help our cause and motivate them to take an action. The more we think in terms of that and less in terms of I want my part of the organization to have a button, the better off we're going to be. I was thinking when we were talking about this stuff, I built a little website around a bunch of photos I had taken of a particular building years back, and I built it in 2003. It is so tiny now. It is, if you view it on a modern display, but at the time it filled my laptop. You know what I mean? So I mean that's the thing you don't want to get into. So the more you can build flexibility in from the very beginning, the better off you're going to be. The problem is that executive directors want something to sign off on. They want a thing that looks like something that they can say, check, right? So getting that kind of flexible approach through a normal institution could be. I had an organization I was at about a year and a half ago. We launched a site that was built responsive from the very beginning. It was an independent project. We got an outside firm to do the construction. It was very sophisticated. It was particularly hard to get the executive directors to wrap their heads around that particular thing. So.
Those are some good thoughts. I think you're asking the right question because anyone who launches a website today, they may change it and update it and revise it, but you're probably going to be on that platform for a couple of years, which is okay. But you also want to make it as flexible and adaptable going forward as possible. So I'll mention a couple things at the content level and maybe a couple slightly more technical things. Like Colin said, at the content level, obviously you want, if you're not on a content management system, you should move on to one. If you're not, and you should start thinking about how your content is going to feed into that. And I think just the best practice you should follow is just have your content as broken down into the smallest pieces that make sense and have them labeled or with metadata and organized in the best way that makes sense. Don't have 30-page white papers that have a short summary, a long summary, full text, images, graphics, data tables, all locked up in a PDF. Don't do that. Each of those should be discrete content, pieces of content that you put on your website as HTML or as inline content, and that they're tagged appropriately, because down the road you might want to pull all those summaries together and make them into a pamphlet. You might want to pull all the data sets together and do something with the data. So make all of those discrete pieces if you can by having the content separated from the presentation. And technically, in terms of technology, to kind of be future forward, and I wasn't the one on our team who spoke about this, so I won't do it as well as they did. But make sure that your website is on a content management system, and make sure it's a good content management system. Don't go with one that your cousin's brother's friend's web company in their garage built, and it's really, really good, sure, but how long of a life is that little content management system going to have? Go with something that's got a track record, that's going to be around. We're big fans of open source tools, but there are some proprietary tools that can work well too. But go with something that isn't just one company's little thing that they think is cool, because they might not be around in 5 years, and then you're up a creek without a paddle.
Make sure that there are a lot of people who can support it.
A lot of people are
other
using
than
it
the company that makes the technology.
And I say this is a company that used to have our own content management system, so we've been up that road. So go with something. We like Drupal, we like WordPress. There's other products as well, but go with ones that have a wide user base and a wide audience, a wide community of people who can support you in case you don't like one vendor, you want to go with another. You want to leave yourself plenty of options.
So I'm going to be a little contrarian here to the other folks on the panel, I think. I actually think that you should not spend very much money at all on your website. your website is a declining asset right now, right? The number of people who are on your website and going to your website is in decline. Your assets and resources that you allocate to your website should correspondingly be on the decline. If you spent $50,000 5 years ago to update your website, spend 10 this time around, right? Because the reality is that these websites now churn. In our company's history, we're a year old and we've gone to 3 different content management systems, right? So we've gone from static websites through Tumblr, then now we've got a WordPress based on Heroku, and we might move to Drupal because we like it a little bit better. When you're in a world where we've now standardized on some amounts of content factorization, right? It used to be that everyone had their own kind of content way to format content. Drupal used to be slightly different than WordPress, slightly different than everything else. Now we're at a spot where the formats are getting much more similar across all these systems, which means you can transition from systems easier than easier, right? So getting into a spot where you're tied into, remember, there's not just lock-in or buy-in for technology, there's lock-in or buy-in for developer resources that you sync into your website, right? So, for example, if you're using Drupal and you use some custom Drupal modules, God forbid you try and move, right? Even to another Drupal provider, because the developer that made that custom module has knowledge baked into it. So if you sunk 6 months of your own time, 6 months of their developer time into something custom, you make it that much harder to be better next year, right? So you're kind of locking your into a system. So I would say standards-based, cheap. If you can use a prefab template, do it and get it out there. That's the most important part because it helps you think simply. It helps you realize that your website is really only a tiny, tiny fraction of what your overall online budget should be. And start thinking of it like that. Start thinking about, if I have an online budget, start spending it on things like online ads. They work, right? Getting people back to action pages, simple stuff like that. Don't necessarily spend it on in-depth 50,000 level deep content structure with all these features and everything else like that. Get out of that. Have 4 tabs across the top, no more. Have 15 pieces of content that you want to focus on in any given month. That's it. And everything else, but dump into an archive somewhere and let people search out on Google for it.
Now there may be a happy medium here.
I'm going to have to disagree about 1,000%.
So I want to tie together a couple things. Something that Chris mentioned. Between the two, if you're looking at a situation where you think your website may need to change frequently, that you may want to move from system to system, the truth is that the standardization of the back-end databases is really key. But the fact that the formats are standard in the back is of no value to you unless you put a lot of thought into your tagging system, into your hierarchy, into the taxonomy of how you organize your data. Because if you put a lot of thought into the data that you have, the content that you have, and make sure that all the content that you want fed to a certain area of whatever website you might have today, tomorrow, or down the road has the same tag, it just makes it that much easier to migrate it over later. So just always think in terms of how you're organizing your content. If you can trim content because it doesn't serve your mission, then just put it in on a hard drive somewhere and leave it away. And focus on the content that's most important and make sure it's tagged and structured in such a way that you can use it. It's broken down to its component parts, all that kind of stuff, so that you can use it no matter what system you have today, tomorrow, or the next day.
I'll tell you, if you're on a Drupal site and you want to transition to something else, welcome to hell, right? You can talk about tagging, talk about all this. Websites are not portable yet. Maybe one day they will be, but if I never, ever, ever in my life ever do another website migration, I will be extremely happy because you always, regardless of how good your system is, end up having to copy-paste at some point along the process. Maddening. I will actually take issue very seriously with Chris because I've worked on way too many websites where one of the great strengths was the depth of backed content. MyOnlyPolitics.com, some of my articles from 3, 4, 5 years ago still generate significant amounts of traffic.
And I might suggest that they came from Google, which deep indexed your website as opposed to your homepage.
That is correct. But you were saying 10 or 15 items of content.
Yeah, so that's the point. Remember, Google's going to index you. So don't bother coming up with an extensive data structure for your content. Don't bother. Don't bother with identifying the particular tags or anything else like that. Screw it. Google's going to index you, and no matter what you tag it with, Google's going to find their own tags and use their own tags no matter what. Doesn't matter what you put in the meta tags, in the header, or the top, or anything else. The reality is no matter how you put your content on your website, Google's going to index it better, and people are going to find it through Google far easier and faster and more likely than any other way of finding it.
But that's true. But what they see when you get to the website, I mean, sure, there's a declining attention of people coming to your website. That's key. Mm-hmm. But the ones who are coming to your website may be the most important people in your audience, and so you. Journalists, for now, at least, funders. You still have to make sure that your most important content is elevated to the front and that it's able to be seen.
Top 10. Everything else goes away.
And see,
that's what I'm saying.
See, I work with too many organizations that they have say people out in the field. They have a website's audience is not just external. It is often internal. It is us going to the website to see what our partner projects are doing. Right? You can't just say, no, you don't need that, because very often you do. A website isn't, a website has many, many, many different purposes.
If you're building an interest site, you're absolutely right. But I'm saying
let's take a break here.
Yeah, we're having fun.
Let's take a break in that and take a few questions from the audience.
We'll get right back to it. Don't you worry,
yes.
Ben.
I'm sure they'll weave it back in. So let's take a question right here. Thank you. And then we'll go.
One of you mentioned responsive design, I believe. Is that like where you go to a website and suddenly it's you're not asking it to scroll, but it's scrolling and everything's kind of in a box and it's just going all up and down?
Bring up Slate.
Slate's a good example.
Bring up Slate.
Actually, I could show off that county health site. Do you still have that window open that I showed?
If it's badly done,
or you could go
like certain sites, as they load, they suddenly just explode around, and you're like, I'm just trying to read the first article.
I was told that that's because it's been optimized for mobile devices.
It can be.
But I'm just, so the bigger question is, the real question is, I just want to know what we're talking about, but what I want to know is,
okay.
Yeah.
Is that where everyone has to go? Because I think it's awful.
Well, that sounds...
Because it's like you haven't, you can't, you see something go by real quick that is what you wanted to go to, and then how the hell do you get back to it?
That sounds like an example of responsive design done poorly.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yes, did you want to...
Yeah, I'd like to say that it doesn't matter how the pages are designed, how the site layout is designed, organized, but partly, SEO is very important. So everyone's getting there by Google. You still want to make sure you design your pages, the headlines, the titles, all that kind of stuff very carefully. And secondly is, once somebody gets there, you want them to be able to find other stuff. Depth of visits, spend time on your site, there are a bunch of pages. So every page is like a landing page. In other words, every page has to have all the same navigation, organization, as the home page.
Now, do you use the same amount of effort and time to put into every single Facebook post?
Yeah, and a lot of your traffic is going to come from social media, so you're going to want to do some outreach on there.
So, to the extent that you're optimizing your website, you should also be optimizing every other aspect that people see. And I think that's what people forget. The website is so easy to sink hours and days and god-awful amounts of conversations into, and makes people realize that if they're spending 10 hours on a website and only 1 hour on their social media strategy, they've got the numbers way whacked out. That if they're going through a website design process, they should be going through a social media design process. They should be going through all the other comms processes that are out there. I think that's where people get caught into kind of the trap of the website. Whereas if you recommend to a group, say like, you get 10 pieces of content, 4 links, you get a home page. That's what the .coms on the West Coast are doing now. If you look at IBM's site and you compare it to every single .com on the West Coast, they're radically different, right? IBM's still caught in the old kind of mechanism of our website has to have everything. Dell's the same way. It sucks. But if you go to any West Coast site, it is a one-pager where they tell you what they do. Even $1 billion companies, companies that are bigger than IBM, right? And that strategy of saying, you've only got a few seconds in your website. So anyway, that's a question. I'll leave it up.
This is not what I was referring to,
Okay.
and now I'm hesitant to give you. It's actually 2 PR firms I can think of, but I don't want to tell you because you said that was badly done.
Oh, maybe
So,
we don't know. Until we see it, yeah.
But it's like everything goes all the way across the page, and the page moves without you making any effort to scroll.
That sounds like a bug.
Drag the
No,
corner.
no.
Yeah. Can you drag
That's not what I was told when I was working at one of those
narrow.
PR firms recently.
Can you just shrink it?
So I don't know.
Don't maximize the screen.
Yeah, I did.
So this is responsive design.
Well, if
What
we
does that
move it.
mean?
Basically,
Because now I don't know what
if
it
your
is.
screen is this wide, the content rearranges to fit that screen.
Right.
There's one website
Right.
that will work on a mobile phone.
Okay, well that's
on a
what I thought,
tablet.
but okay, that's not what I was
There you
expecting
go.
to see.
So this is responsive design. So
Gotcha.
this page
Yeah.
goes from left, right,
Perfect,
to top, bottom, depending on you're in a small screen.
Landscape
No,
or portrait, but
no,
well, I
Chris's
wonder
comment-
what these other ones are all about then, because I'm confused. But
Chris's,
thank you.
Chris's comment.
Basically, every one of those little boxes are in a div,
Right.
and it just says when the screen is at a certain size, the div will either be like next to each other or above each other to maximize amount of space on the website or not annoy you and make you like zoom in on the phone.
And then the frustration comes, if you have a slow connection and you change the size of your screen and all of a sudden something you're reading starts to move while you're reading it. And that's
Well,
where I think
this was upon originally getting to the site, including at the office of that company. So I don't know what that is, or what philosophy, design, or otherwise is behind it. But
I do want to follow up with
I
something
thought it
Chris
was
said.
awesome.
You're talking about all the hip firms on the West Coast.
Right.
Everybody who was hip used to have an AOL button on their site too. So, you know.
The other thing is that,
Things change.
those examples are companies that are not content producer companies. So if you're working for, like I spent 6 years working in a think tank.
There you go.
And the idea of the think tank only having, featuring 10 pieces of content on the website doesn't make any sense because its
That's all it
function
does.
is to provide deep content.
No, but actually point out something on Slate that right there, if you click that anywhere on the site, you can basically start to drill down into everything. And when they relaunched this design, they had not enabled the access to the back content very well. You could only scroll through about this many of the most recent articles. I emailed in, and judging from the tone of the person who wrote back, about 10,000 regular Slate readers had written back in. Because we didn't want just the most recent. We wanted to be able to scroll back days and days and days.
But see, a news website is way different from an organization's website.
Well, that brings up a good question that Alan and I
It
both
depends
talked about.
if you have if your organization is focused on providing a steady stream of content, and that content is relevant to what's happening in the news today, but also in politics, which has longer shelf life, then of course you need that deeper content. And so, but if it's a marketing website for a company that has a fixed number of services and things like that, then the idea of a slim, lean website makes a lot more sense than all these white papers and stuff being stacked up into it. So I guess it depends on the purpose of the website. Actually, and this is a good point. It always comes down to it depends on what you're trying to do and what the role that the website plays in your business plan, in your mission.
So we're in the. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's a good point that I think too often assumptions are made that the website is the be-all, end-all. And I think you made, I really like all the comments about, first of all, the website is one touch point, and, you have to pay as much or more attention to other social media touch points. And I think that there is, definitely that there can be this obsessiveness about it, and that's not really purposeful. And I think along with nonprofits, it can come because they're not thinking a little bit more like a for-profit company, which would serve them a little better in terms of managing some of their content.
Wait, just 1 second. We have a question right here, and then we'll go right there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, explicitly, the word navigation is coming to my mind. And one of the things that organizations will sink tons of resources into is, oh my God, the navigation, blah, 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 blah. So if we're thinking about a seamless relationship between these external channels and our website and in hub, whatever metaphor you want to use, and then content is pieces rather than an archive. Like, are there new basic principles that people should have in mind if they're redesigning a website about what navigation should look like?
So
one quick outside the box.
For people who like websites, not
There's
people
just
who don't.
There was a website I saw. This is probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It was a website, Modernista. It was a communication strategy firm, digital, and their website essentially was a little corner navigation menu. And that was it. And when you clicked on portfolio, it opened up their Flickr page. And when you clicked on video portfolio, it opened up their YouTube page. And when you clicked on About Us, it opened up their their LinkedIn profile page. So that all of now I don't recommend this, but what I'm saying is that there is an opportunity to think very creatively outside the box about the relationship between your website, its navigation, and your other social media and other web properties. And so I don't know if we have an answer yet. I'm sure you all have.
Let me do one anecdote. I got a great anecdote relevant to this particular thing. So we're sitting around the table at Salsa, right? This was about 4 or 5 years ago, and we're debating what goes on our homepage, right? And so we all sit around. There's 6 of us, each department's represented, right? And we're like, okay, we're designing our nav bar. Right? We got to figure out what the nav bar is for our page. And little did I know that the rat's nest we were getting into in this conversation, right? We all agreed at the outset we want it to be simple, right? It's got to be simple. And everyone's like, of course, this is going to be easy. Cakewalk. Go around the table. Every single person had a completely different opinion about what the simple was, right? So the developers wanted to make sure that things like API access was up there, and all these other things were up there, and the support team wanted the support links and all the stuff that they thought was the most important, right? So it turned out that the nav bar becomes the heart of the organization, right? And it becomes that the nav bar itself on a website, and I don't hate websites, websites are critical, but the nav bar becomes, and I think you brought up a key point, because the nav bar becomes how you as an organization decide what is important. Because you can't have everything in a nav bar. You just can't fit it in, right? So you have to take someone's job and say, you're not getting in the nav bar. And that is a decision that often comes down from the top that makes you understand what an organization is important for. So it's a great conversation to have. You got to have it and to try and do it.
And you don't want to design the nav bar based on what the organization thinks it should look like. It should be based on what your audience who's coming to the website needs.
I'm going to raise something that has not come up yet, but is very relevant, and that is called user testing. Because, and it does not, you can pay a lot of money to have user testing, or you can get 5 friends and your mom and ask them to do a defined task on the website. Find this, sign up for this. That is one of the best ways to find the bugs in your navigation. And it could be fascinating to see how differently people look for information on a website than, say, I do, right? But yes, I mean, one thing is there is no answer, right? There is no simple answer. We are all experimenting with user interface, basically. Every time you build a site, you're functionally experimenting with user interface.
But it's usually not your organizational chart.
It better not be.
We have a couple of questions. One right here, then 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead.
Mine's a comment. So I jumped in the middle of this. But the issue with the website shouldn't be your main focus. It absolutely should be, and it deserves 10 times the effort. And here's why: because you don't own anything else. You don't own Facebook. You don't own.
You own your posts on Facebook.
You do.
You own your posts on Twitter.
But you don't own the people that like you. You don't have any way to get in touch with them other than through that mechanism. You have nothing. You have nothing to fall back on if that platform evaporates. I'm not saying Facebook's going to evaporate, but the only thing that you own is your website, and also the only place that you can collect emails is your website.
Not anymore. There's tools like ActionSprout, which will turn your Facebook page into an email harvester.
Any modern site you can gather those anywhere.
And so every action you take on your Facebook page, they have to give you their email address to take the action.
Yeah. But you still want people to come to your site because that is who you are. You aren't Facebook, you aren't Twitter, you aren't any of these other properties. Yes, the stuff that's on there, but you need to drive everything
I'm drinking
back.
Coke. I've never gone to Coke's website.
But the thing is, while
that's marketing.
I mean, while
we're not talking about marketing, we're talking about communicating with people.
But the reality
nobody here is selling soda. Nobody here is selling sugar water. people here are trying to develop interactions with people.
Selling ideas often.
But the truth is that I want to reach, if I'm running a campaign, if I'm focused on reaching only primarily the people that come to my website, I'm leaving 90%, I'm leaving 90% of my audience out.
The website needs to be the center.
Well, we did start with the idea that it's the hub, it's the center because you own it.
So I didn't know.
But the relative
it
importance of the other channels is still very high.
We have one question right there in the corner, then another. Go ahead.
I don't want to hear what you're saying about navbar, and there is a tendency, particularly with the older clients, to hyper-focus on that. But we also need to remind that the wireframe of the page is the navigation. And how we choose to have persistent containers, and what the function of those containers are, is implied in navigation. Also recognizing that an increasing proportion of our organic traffic is going to come off of Google, which is really the big navigation bar.
Well, it's not increasing. It's been like 70% for most sites since like 1998.
There's no end to that, particularly, right? Because that's the interface that's never going to change. So we have to make sure wherever they land inside of the site, to an earlier point, it's not just the landing page, it's the totality of the site. That's why the wireframe itself is actually more important than the nav bar. They'll look at what's on the page first before they go to the top of the page or the bottom of the page.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, you can involve users even in the design of the navigation or the content layout, but you want to look at it from the user's perspective, obviously, so user-centered design, and try and figure out what your audience is and what they're going to be most interested in. But you can even, besides user testing, after you've done designs, you could, there's an information architecture thing called a card sort that we usually do when we're trying to figure out our content organization, but we have 150,000 articles of blog posts, so we always have a hard problem figuring out how to hierarchically put everything. And I also work for a newspaper that wants to get people fit as ads, so we try and get people to our site. So for another reason than the reason you talked about, I mean, I'd rather be engaged more on social media. But so the navigation, it's got to be fluid. It's got to be able to be updated because things are always changing, and it's got to be, you take all your content, put it in a bunch of categories, and then tell a bunch of people inside the organization, get some people outside the organization to just stick it into categories and put them in piles together or something like that. There's one way of organizing the navigation. But another thing, I was along the lines of that, traffic coming from Google or from social media. People are coming in, first visit to the site, they don't really know about your stuff, so you want to not only have your navigation there, but related content is very important. We're trying to figure out how to pull that off too. So every landing page people come to, you want to take them to something that they might be interested in based upon what they're looking for.
You might also like ...
Right.
Something Slate is very good at.
You know, you're touching on a much bigger question, and this is the notion of branding. And a lot of people tend to think of branding as my logo, and but it's not just your logo. It's your tagline. It's your navigation. It's the layout of the content on your website, which indicates your organization's priorities. And if they come to an interior page through Google, and that page only shows a priority based on the story they search for rather than your priority, then you're not getting the branding out of that page that you might need for your organization's mission. So all these things have to, so when you look at any single page on your website, no matter how it's constructed, you need to think in terms of, is this presenting my organization, my campaign, my effort in a way that conveys who I am, who we are, what we're trying to accomplish, and what we want the reader or the visitor to take away.
I might even say, go back to Communications 101, which I always do because we get so down to the weeds, we kind of forget who you're trying to reach, what are you trying to get them to do. So should be building a website. Okay, great, we're building a website. No, actually, we're building a communications channel that is designed to get certain results, right? And because we call it a website, we come to it with certain assumptions. And it is still, a defined, thing out there, right? But really, we should think of it as a channel. And I do, to bring up touch on the question of ownership, my own site is aimed very much at people who are digital advocates, right? Either in politics or advocacy. And they tended to be very heavy RSS users, Yahoo Reader, Google Reader, and all that. Fully half of my readership was via Google Reader. And when Google Reader shut down, I lost 2/3 of those people because I didn't own that channel. And it was great because RSS was great because it let you keep up with a lot of different websites at once. But when Google shut that down, they hurt me, right? So that's a no. I mean, they actually hurt my traffic. God damn it! That again comes back to that idea of this is the place where you can make your case.
You still had your website.
Yeah.
You still had all your traffic, and you were still the victim of some other channel shutting down that you weren't even feeding. You weren't necessarily. I mean, by having an RSS feed on your website, you aren't choosing Google Reader. The audience was.
Yes.
So I think one of the lessons there is that even though you own your website, that's not enough to maintain your audience and to maintain ownership, effective ownership.
This is so much fun. I don't have much.
Happy I could help.
Come on, let's go. What Chris said is true and provocative, but not completely true.
Also provocative.
We're in the middle of redesigning the Forum 1 website. You'll see a new version in a couple weeks. And a few months ago when we were getting started with it, I said to our team, I said, we really only need a homepage. Our blogs are on WordPress, and the profiles, the bios, that's all from LinkedIn, and presentations and all that smart stuff, that's on SlideShare or Pinterest. Staff pictures, staff videos, it's all on YouTube or Flickr or whatever. It's like, we really don't have much. We don't need much. And they looked at me like I was a little bit crazy. It's like, what do you mean? So we're actually launching a website. So our website, I think, for a lot of organizations, they're much more stripped down, and it's not just a new design aesthetic. I think it's because, again, people spend 99.9% of their time not on your website, on other places on the web. So you want to be reaching them with content in a lot of places. So I think websites maybe can't be as stripped down as a .com or an IT shop out in Silicon Valley, but for a lot of organizations, it's a smart way to think of having a presence that's really vital and really kind of epitomizes who you are, but thinking more widely. The one question was kind of how to think about navigation, and has that changed with any of this? And I think yes and no. On the one hand, it's good old user experience. You've got to think about your users. You've also got to think about your organizational priorities, put them together, and figure out who wins, who gets on the nav bar. It isn't just considering the users. It isn't just considering the organizational needs. You've got to weave them together. There are new innovations in kind of how you present them, but I think, and does the nav bar pop up from here? But it's just it's still kind of user experience 101, determining what goes in the nav bar.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Nothing focuses the mind quite like creating a navigation bar. It's like sort of the organizational mind. It really does bring out all of those little, this person gets more money than me kind of tensions. Yeah.
I would agree with you that it depends on the purpose of the site, but I really think you have to stop and think about, okay, who are your key audiences? What we always do is we start with business goals and objectives, and then we find who are the key audiences, and then we think about what are the needs and interests. What are those audiences coming to this particular site for? And really understanding why your user is going to come to your site, to pull them in and then get them to do certain things by creating crisp, clean, clear, interesting, engaging content that then moves them through a particular path that you can measure using analytics, and then using your social channels to really pull them in. And so when it comes to deciding what should be in your navigation bar, I would just say that really needs to be closely guided by the content that you're producing to achieve the goals that you want to on your website with the audiences you want to be to move the needle with.
I mean, case in point, when you're designing an advocacy action website or web page, the fewer click options you have on the page, the more likely you're going to do exactly what you want them to do.
Especially a landing page.
Yeah, a landing page. You know, a lot of people. I've seen a lot of organizations that'll take their template and put the action page in the middle of the template, and then drive people to that page. And a whole bunch of people are going to peel off and click on the navigation bar instead of clicking on send this message to Congress. If you are driving people to that page for a campaign, you don't want them to do anything else but take that action. And every other link on that page is actually a wasted opportunity. So, you know, again, it's about the purpose of that website, web page, and what you want people to do when they get there.
I have a question. So we have a question right here, and then right here.
I guess so. I'm in the position of having different layers of content on our website, and everyone we have a very large staff who are researchers who think that this really wonky report should be like front and center.
Yeah.
I'm like new to the position of managing a website.
Oh, you got screwed.
Like,
So, I'm sorry, you're in a tough boat.
It's been so much easier to like say, well, we're going to give you this page for your report, and we're going to like be saying, sure, we'll put up the and so I'm bought into something that communications director is our whole website is, but I'm wondering like how, if you, in your experience, like what are ways of bringing along the rest of the staff?
Great question. It's a great question.
On what the point of the website is. Like I see it as a tool for activist donations. They see it as a tool for research.
What about just we've had good luck with groups on scheduling stuff, right? Understanding that your website is a limited vehicle of information distribution. You can't have everything there all the time, and the more you have on it, the less each one has an impact. But if you schedule it, if you say, that's an awesome report, I'll get it in my schedule in 2 weeks, and then we'll blow it out of the water, and then it's going to be up there for a week and a half, and we'll do what it can do, and then we're going to put it into our archive, something like that. That baking in the schedule gets everybody involved, and it can help you control things as well too, right? So if you know you're having a big advocacy action coming up and you want a lot of focus around that, shift the schedule around, but you don't necessarily have to shift the homepage around too much or try and get everything onto the homepage. Just say, listen, I got 3 slots of content. Okay, I got to fit all your stuff in 3 slots of content. Don't tell them that there's 3 or 4 or 5 or maybe 10. There's 3, there are 5, or some limited thing. But that schedule can allow for much better allocation of that limited resource.
Yeah, there's a flip side to this as well. You know, I worked at a think tank where we produced a lot of big reports, and nobody reads big reports except for maybe a couple of the key people that you want to, and a few other people who have too much time on their hands. But we had many different channels. We had all the social media channels, we had the blog and all this kind of stuff. And that big report was really important in terms of shaping policy opinions. We would take the report. Was it really? Well, it could be if it was used appropriately. And what we decided to do was we'd take a big report and we might create a video that goes with the report where the one person who wrote the report highlights with some green screen graphics what's going on, what the main points are. We would do a charticle, came up with this term, where we would take the 3 or 4 key charts from the big report, write 1 paragraph to highlight the important point you should know about that chart, and made a short document and put it up there. We would make an infographic, because when you think about it, if I'm going to tweet something, I want something that I can show in a picture. If I'm going to share something on Tumblr, I may want something a little more involved. If I'm going to push it out to this audience, well, they're really busy. They only have time to read 1 page. And if I'm going to push it out to this audience, well, if I'm going to push it out to a regulatory agency, they got to read everything I give them. So I'm going to give them a lot and force them to read through the whole thing, maybe. But so you have to think in terms of, how do I package this piece of content in multiple different ways so that it is as effective as possible for each of the audiences that I'm trying to persuade. That means that you have a lot of content, most of which is not on the homepage, lives somewhere in your website, and you may be driving people directly to it through links on Twitter or Facebook. But it becomes part of a campaign, so to speak, to promote a piece of content or a body of content that's in the report, and then turn that into the pieces. And when you come to each one of those little pieces, you should make sure that there's a link to all the other versions in case somebody gets there and says, oh, I want more depth, or I want more pictures, or I want more video, and they can get there.
No, you mentioned earlier the idea of a new media newsroom, and my friend Troy Schneider wrote up that idea on my site about 5 years ago. That we think we do tend to think in terms of, oh, we'll create a web page for this, but really it is a package of content. When I was at National Women's Law Center, we would turn out these super wonky reports. I mean, they had the issue experts of issue experts. But we'd take their Hill one-pager, so they'd boil it down to a one-pager for the Hill. We'd take that one-pager and turn it into 20 different tweets, right? So, again, was it Dick Cheney, recycling is a virtue, is personal virtue? Well, on the web, it really is, right? But your earlier question about sort of the content prioritization, if your organization doesn't have like weekly communications meetings, they should, right? And work the online part into that. It goes the same way with emails. You don't want 3 different parts of your organization wanting to send out an email on the same day. If you can work the website publishing schedule, promotion schedule, what you're going to be highlighting, along with the email, along with the social, that if you can have calendars for all of these, or at least a planning session, it can help out enormously. But your earlier question, just to finish, your earlier question, though, was about the permanent repository of content. Other than getting them to do the work themselves, I don't know. And suddenly they go, oh, it takes time to format 100 pages, doesn't it? I don't really have a good answer.
We used to, we had this horribly named meeting called FPOMs, Future Product Outreach Marketing meetings. And basically, when we had some policy people that had conceived of a product, of a report that they were going to do, it had been approved, but they were in the beginning stages of putting it together. We would convene a meeting with the communications team, the digital team, the social team, the video team, the events team, and we would say, okay, this is what they would tell us what the report was, and then we would brainstorm on, well, what are we going to do with this report? What's the purpose of it? Who's the target audience? How are we going to get this into that audience? Figure out what the formats, the different variations of that content should look like in order to meet those criteria. Work out a timeline for it, a campaign, and essentially we would take a report that they were writing because they thought it was important, and we would turn it into a package of content and a marketing strategy to get it out there into the right people's hands. And then you start turning it into a whole other level. People start to, the next time they come in with a report, they come in with a much clearer sense of why they're writing the report, what it involves in order to get it up on the website, what's worth doing and what's not worth doing, and all that stuff. And they start thinking about it that way because they have to create the content.
So your question is how to get those researchers to want to do this. I don't know if these guys didn't answer that question. So
do you have a good answer?
The answer to that question is find one who wants to be a pilot, who wants to be a case study, who wants to be a guinea pig, and work with one and do something innovative and creative. And the others are going to look at that and say, oh, that's really interesting. And you'll show them the stats and say, well, look how much traffic we got over here versus your typical old stuff. So you might try that.
It's funny, CAP wouldn't share the readers, how many people were reading all the different articles on the website for fear that the people who weren't getting read as much would stop working, as opposed to see it as a challenge to write more interesting things. Well, I mean, I don't know. But interestingly, some people see it as a way to encourage more competition, more energy. Oh, I got to get my readership up, and other people will say, well, nobody ever reads my stuff. What's the point? And maybe getting rid of people like that is a good idea.
Don't underestimate the power of a cupcake.
So we have time for a few questions. So what we're going to do is take all the questions you all have and give the panelists a chance to give their wrap up. So let's go ahead and just kind of, if you all want to just think or jot down the questions, go ahead. So we'll start here.
We've sort of been touching on it, but when we were looking at the one about the Save the Children of Syria campaign, and so I was thinking about the balance between, like, when you have a specific campaign, but then again, of course, Save the Children has multiple
campaigns and causes and and all our organizations do. So, kind of how you do the balance between, really using the web presence for, focusing on a specific issue versus the kind of general day in, day out, trying to fulfill the mission.
Okay. Other questions?
Well, if we take more than one, we will not answer them all.
No, that's okay, but I just want the audience to be able to ask their
Yeah.
question. Just pick and choose what you want to focus on. Okay, go ahead.
I just have a quick comment or two about the thing about the readership of articles. Say we send out an email every day with the traffic for top traffic getters, articles, and blog posts. But we think that'll motivate reporters.
I think it does too. Didn't have
We're also
support for
trying
that
to figure
idea.
out a display to show Twitter activity for our stuff too.
It's a good idea.
We got that idea from Boston.
I think it's great to put a fire under people.
Did you want to ask a question? Okay.
So one thing I said at the beginning is that I wonder how sustainable it is to be spending all of your energy and money in places like Facebook as opposed to your website. And so if you guys were advising someone who's launching a new website or redesigning, like how much would you rely on social media interfaces to do that relationship building work for you versus trying to make sure people always, that's one of the big moral issues that we're all advocacy groups are having, so maybe you can comment on that too.
Any other final questions? Okay, so hand it over to
So
you.
I have built at my job, against my objections, 2 websites where the goal was to build a community to have all those relationship buildings happening on our website, and nobody came because I didn't get the support to sink $1 million into marketing that website. Right? If you don't have the commitment and the resources to tell people that, no, don't go to Facebook. You don't want to go to Facebook. You want to go to my website instead, which frankly is a no-win proposition. You will never succeed like that. And so I think that you have to have a balance. Your website serves purposes of content, of having your content there, of framing your brand, of having some ownership, of permanence of your content. But most websites, even if they're built with relationship building tools, will never have the critical mass audience that you're going to get on Facebook and Twitter because that's where the people are. And so you have to find a way to marry the two in order to make them play off each other as opposed to focusing on one versus the other. And I really think that it's not about a website strategy, it's not about a social media strategy, it's about a web presence strategy and how they're all playing off each other and how they're all integrated to each other. And that's the real value proposition.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up by following up with that. That's exactly basically what I was going to say. Is the number of channels has exploded. It's not going to get any smaller. The amount of time anyone is on any specific channel is smaller and smaller and smaller. Assume that whereas before people were spending minutes on a channel, they're now spending seconds, right? So that means that your strategy should make sure you encompass all of them somehow, even if it's a small fraction. So you probably want specific numbers. I'll say that probably a quarter of your time on your website, a quarter of your time on social media, a quarter of your time on paid advertising, it works. And then a quarter of your time on everything else. Sorry, yeah, of course. Email and everything
And then a
else.
quarter of time on everything else.
Yeah.
And I'll say something completely different.
Yeah, so.
Now for something completely different.
So, because only by, your people are probably not where you think they are, and you're not going to know where they are until you actually put the effort into trying each of these channels where they are. So that'd be how I'd split it up, and note that that other category is going to, like you said, bump you into the 125, 150% category, and humans aren't going to
hire somebody else.
Humans aren't going to be able to do it all. So I'll leave it with that.
I would say put 80% of your time into creating good content. That the channels are less important than the content. The channels will change.
Although the content has to be designed in such a way
It has to be
that it's optimized for each of the different
exactly.
channels you're on.
So if I'm communicating with policy wonks, they want a 30-page paper. They love a 30-page paper. I'll take that and turn it into a one-pager for the Hill. Take that, turn into, if I have a good designer, turn into an infographic for use on Facebook. Turn into a series of tweets to tweet out. right? But the hard part is coming up with the original content in the first place. Again, think less about the presentation, more about the content, because you can adapt it to use in the different media. And then, to Chris's point, yes, the number of channels is exploding, but most of us do find that the bulk of our followers, the bulk of our potential followers, are in a much smaller number of places. I'll give an example. 2008, the Obama campaign built a presence in something like 20 different social networks, like 22, something like that. In 2012, they focused on Facebook and Twitter because that was where the audience was, right?
Although those two might change the next time
Absolutely,
around.
they could change completely.
But you'll know which ones they are.
We'll all be Snapchatting soon.
So there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to. I think a little bit of advice I'd give is just one, find some organizations who are bigger and have bigger budgets than you and copy what they do. Because everything's transparent on the web, you can see what they're doing. Find some organizations, whether it's Save the Children, Greenpeace, I don't care, and copy and sort of see, well, how much time are they putting into different channels. So that's a good way to learn. Second, I'd say is find some way to be collecting user feedback on a regular basis. Most organizations don't spend enough time doing that. And the third thing I'd say is this is a constantly evolving field. The thing that's really valuable that a lot of groups have a hard time getting into is get into a very iterative learning cycle. Try something, see what happened, learn from it, and repeat, and repeat. And so every quarter have a modest goal or two. Try something, see what the result was, and the next quarter try something different and different. And obviously don't see anything you're doing online as kind of static or fixed, but take a very iterative learning approach to it.
Stay on top by reading epolitics.com, reading my column in Social Media Today, reading the new Connectivity blog, and a few others out there that are just people whose job it is to stay on top of it. One of the nice things about, I know Colin and I, is that we learn about stuff partly from research, but partly because the people who are building it come to us and say, hey, check this out. We want you to write about it. So it makes it a little easier for us to stay on top of it, and then we turn around and make it easier for everybody else to stay on top of it.
There is no perfect solution. There is no best way to do it. There are just a lot of ways to try and see what happens. And that is one of the things you're talking about, iterative.
It makes it fun.
Getting away from a fear of failure, and in a nonprofit world where we often don't have outcomes that we can measure. We just have processes. We get obsessed with the process because our goals are often abstract. Not being afraid to try things and see what works. And if it fails, oh well, you learned something. One of the most famous experiments in the history of science failed to detect the Michelson-Morley experiment, which was looking for the ether back in the 1800s. They did not find what they were looking for, and that was incredibly important. A negative result can be a very powerful result.
Well, I just want to give a chance to thank our panel and also turner4D for hosting us. We have about 10 minutes for you all to kind of network with each other and connect, so I just wanted to leave a little time at the end for that. Cool. So let's just give them a round of applause.
And y'all too.
And feel free to talk to network and.
The mobile email. It must be possible for the form itself to query the phone for your email address.
I was thinking about that because NTP Van has put out a press release